I've always been inspired by the Motown ladies, specifically because their music impacted a generation and helped lead a revolution.
He was 9 years old when he first stood in front of her. She was already the most famous woman in music. Nobody in that room could have guessed that 40 years later, a dying man would write her name into his will, not as a friend, not as a colleague, but as the person he trusted most to raise his own children. This is the real story of Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. Not rumor, not gossip, but a relationship documented in interviews, biographies, court records, and Michael's own words. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you'll understand why, out of everyone in his life, he chose her. Let's go back to where it started. July 23, 1968. A Volkswagen minibus pulled up outside a cluster of small white bungalows on West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. The sign above the door read Hitsville, USA, the headquarters of Motown Records. Inside that bus were 5 brothers from Gary, Indiana: Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and the youngest, a 9-year-old with a voice that made grown men stop talking. His name was Michael Jackson. Motown was already home to some of the biggest names in music: Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Gladys Knight. And at the top of that list stood a 24-year-old Detroit native who had signed with the label 8 years earlier as a teenager. Her name was Diana Ross, and by 1968 she was the lead singer of the Supremes and one of the biggest stars on the planet. When Motown released the Jackson 5's debut album, they marketed it under a bold tagline, "Diana Ross presents the Jackson 5." The story told to the public was that Diana had personally discovered the group performing at the Apollo Theater and brought them to Motown herself. It made for a great narrative, the reigning queen of Motown crowning her successor. The truth, according to multiple biographers and Motown insiders, is a little different. The real credit for discovering the Jackson 5 is generally given to singer Gladys Knight and Motown executive Suzanne DePass. The Diana Ross discovery story was a marketing strategy dreamed up by Motown founder Berry Gordy, a way to link the label's brightest star to its newest one. But whether or not she discovered them, that PR campaign did something real. It tied Michael Jackson's name to Diana Ross's for the rest of his life, and in many ways, it created the bond itself. So what happened when a 9-year-old boy from Gary, Indiana, suddenly found himself standing next to one of the most famous women in America? By most accounts, Michael was in awe of her. Diana was glamorous, composed, magnetic, everything the industry told a young performer to aspire to be. And unlike a lot of the adults around him, she paid attention to him as a person, not just a voice. That attention became something much more concrete just a year later. In October 1969, while the rest of the Jackson family was being shuttled between hotels by Motown staff, Berry Gordy made an unusual decision. Michael, still just 11 years old, would move in with Diana Ross at her home in the Hollywood Hills. The idea was that living alongside an established star would help him adjust to the industry and pick up some of her discipline. And by most accounts, it worked, at least in terms of shaping his work ethic. Diana kept a strict schedule, went to bed early, and rose early for rehearsals and appointments. Michael later credited that structure with helping build the discipline that would define his career. But something else happened during that year too. According to Michael's mother, Katherine Jackson, in her own memoir, Michael began calling Diana Mama. For a boy who was constantly on the road, constantly performing, constantly being asked to be older than he was, Diana Ross became something close to a surrogate mother. Biographer J. Randy Taraborelli, who wrote the unauthorized biography Call Her Miss Ross, has said that Diana wasn't entirely prepared for that kind of surrogate parent role. Her own career demands were intense, but she cared for Michael and grew genuinely attached to him. That attachment didn't fade as Michael got older. In 1971, the two appeared together on television specials, singing and performing side by side. And by the late 1970s, their paths crossed again in a much bigger way. The 1978 musical film The Wiz. Michael, then 19 years old, played the Scarecrow. Diana starred as Dorothy. It was a chance for the two of them to work together for months at a time, away from Motown's tightly managed publicity machine. According to Taraborelli's reporting, during the filming, Diana was invited to Michael's New York apartment and ended up staying the night. One of her assistants, trying to reach both of them the next morning because they were late for filming, was reportedly surprised to learn they'd both been at Michael's place. There's no evidence anything romantic happened, but the moment became one of the enduring, unresolved details people still bring up when they talk about the two of them. The Wiz wasn't a box office hit. Critics were lukewarm. But it mattered for another reason entirely. It's where Michael Jackson first met producer Quincy Jones, who would go on to produce Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad, the three albums that turned him into the biggest pop star on the planet. By the early 1980s, Michael Jackson wasn't a child star anymore. He was on the verge of releasing Thriller, the best-selling album in history. And it was during this period that he said something in public that nobody expected. In a December 1982 interview with Ebony magazine, Michael was asked about his personal life. What came out was startling in its honesty. He told the magazine he loved Diana Ross, describing her as his mother, sister, and lover all combined into one person, and said he hoped she would one day marry him. It's worth sitting with that for a second. This wasn't a tabloid inventing a quote. This was Michael Jackson, on the record, in one of the most respected black publications in America, describing a woman 14 years his senior in language that blurred every category: maternal, familial, romantic, because for him, apparently, no single category fit. That same year, Michael wrote and produced a song for Diana, Muscles, released in 1982, which became a hit and stands as one of the clearest examples of their continued creative partnership even outside of Motown's orbit. Then came 1981, the American Music Awards, and a moment that fed years of speculation. Diana appeared with a ring on her finger, and rumors circulated that she and Michael had privately become engaged. British tabloids seized on the age gap, with at least one publication mocking her as a cradle snatcher. In a March 1981 interview around that time, Diana herself, holding Michael's hand, publicly described him as being like a son to her, pushing back, at least publicly, against the romantic framing. Whether an actual engagement ever happened remains disputed. There's no confirmed record of an engagement ring exchange or a formal proposal beyond media speculation and later biographer claims. What isn't disputed is that the public relationship between them, in the early 1980s, was intense enough to generate exactly this kind of tabloid frenzy, and that Michael, in his own words to Ebony, wasn't shying away from admitting how he felt. In the mid-1980s, everything shifted. Diana Ross married Norwegian shipping magnate Arne Næss Jr. in a private ceremony. Michael did not attend. He later addressed it directly. In his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalk, Michael wrote that when he heard Diana was getting married, he was happy for her because he knew it would bring her joy, but admitted it was hard for him. He described having to walk around pretending to be thrilled about a wedding to a man he'd never met, while privately feeling hurt and a little jealous, because, in his words, he had always loved Diana and always would. That's about as close as Michael Jackson ever came to publicly grieving a loss that wasn't a death. And it lines up with a pattern biographers have pointed to for years. Several of his songs from that era carry an emotional weight that seems to trace back to this exact period. The most talked about is Dirty Diana, released in 1987. For years, fans assumed it was written about Diana Ross, especially given the timing, right around her wedding. Michael himself said the song was about obsessive fans, not about any specific real person, and biographers have generally treated the direct Dirty Diana is about Diana Ross theory as debunked. But Remember the Time, the lush, nostalgic 1992 single, is a different story. Michael's brother Jermaine has publicly stated that the song was written with Diana Ross in mind, a wistful look back at a connection that had already passed. So was it romantic love, or something else entirely? Most people close to the situation, including biographers who've spent years researching it, land in the same place. There's no solid evidence Michael and Diana were ever a couple in the traditional sense. What the evidence does support is something arguably rarer and more complicated, a bond that started as mentorship, evolved into a surrogate family relationship, and carried an undercurrent of one-sided romantic longing from Michael that never fully resolved, and that Diana, by most accounts, never reciprocated in kind. Diana herself, according to people close to her, was reportedly overheard telling friends that Michael definitely wasn't gay, a small detail, but one that suggests she understood exactly how deep his feelings for her ran, even if she didn't share them the same way. Now here's where the story becomes something much bigger than a childhood crush or tabloid rumor. In 2002, years before his death, Michael Jackson sat down and wrote his will. Buried in the legal language was a single line that would only become public knowledge after he died. If his mother, Katherine Jackson, was unable or unwilling to serve as guardian for his 3 children, the guardian named in her place would not be a sibling, not a business partner, not another family member. It would be Diana Ross. When Michael died suddenly on June 25, 2009, and the will became public a few days later, this detail stunned people. Out of every person in his orbit, famous friends, family members, industry figures, he had chosen Diana Ross as the backup guardian for his 3 children. CNN spoke to people close to the situation at the time. Publicist and journalist Kiernan Mayo Wilbekin suggested that Michael likely chose Diana because she was, in his words, super responsible, someone who understood what it meant to grow up famous, and who could relate to what his children would face growing up in that same spotlight. It wasn't sentiment. It was a calculated decision by a father thinking about his kids' futures. Diana's public response to Michael's death was brief but unmistakably genuine. In a statement released shortly after he died, she said she couldn't stop crying, that it felt too sudden and too shocking to process, and that her heart was hurting for his children and his family. She didn't do a press tour. She didn't sit for a tell-all interview breaking down every detail of their 40-year relationship. She simply said what she felt and largely stepped back from the spotlight on the subject. In the years since, she has occasionally defended his legacy publicly. In 2019, amid renewed controversy following new allegations against Jackson, Ross posted a statement on social media affirming her belief and trust in Michael as what she called a magnificent, incredible force, to her and to many others. It wasn't a detailed rebuttal. It was a short, loyal statement from someone who had known him since he was 9 years old. So what do we actually know, when you strip away the tabloid speculation and the invented quotes that circulate online? We know Michael Jackson met Diana Ross when he was 9 years old, and that Motown deliberately built a public bond between them as a marketing strategy, one that turned into something real. We know he lived with her for about a year as a preteen and called her Mama. We know that in 1982, in his own words to Ebony magazine, he described loving her as a mother, sister, and lover all at once. We know that when she married another man, he stayed away from the wedding and later wrote about the jealousy and hurt he felt, even while being happy for her. We know his brother has said "Remember the Time" was written about her. And we know that in his will, written years before his death, he trusted her, above almost anyone else in his life, with the well-being of his children. What we don't know, and likely never will with full certainty, is exactly what that bond meant to both of them privately. Diana Ross has never given the kind of detailed, tell-all account of their relationship that tabloids love to promise. She's kept most of it private for over 50 years. And maybe that itself tells you something, that some relationships are too complicated, too tangled up in childhood and fame and loss, to be reduced to a single headline. What Michael Jackson and Diana Ross had wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a secret affair hidden from the world. It was something messier and more human than that, a mentorship that turned into a surrogate family bond, laced with a longing on his side that never quite found its match, and a trust on both sides that lasted until the day he died and beyond it. If you found this breakdown of the real, documented history interesting, let us know in the comments what part surprised you most, and subscribe for more deep dives into the true stories behind music's biggest icons.